Hey y'all, it's Patrina Dixon, the It's My Money Lady. I am so excited to be here with you again. I have my wonderful guest, Julina Ogilvie. I'm excited. I was on her show. Now she's on mine. She's all about teaching women about finances and bettering their finances. And then also she has a passion, which I love. That's why she's on, is teaching her daughter, or her children, I should say, about money management skills. So I can't wait for her to tell us about what she's teaching her children based on what she's learned about finances. And that's why she is doing what she's doing today. So before we jump in, I want to make sure if you have not subscribed and you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you drop down and hit that red subscribe button. It's red letters. Make sure you hit that. Also, if you're listening to us on one of the many podcast platforms, make sure that you follow us there as well. And if you enjoy, leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. And I'll get back to you with any answering any questions that you may have. So make sure that you do that. That doesn't cost you anything. And if you have not done so already, make sure you check me out across any social media platform. That's It's My Money _ITS. MYMONEY_. Now with that, Julina, oh my gosh, tell us, before we jump in, I'd love for the guests to know who are you and why are you on the show today? Why is money and money with children of an interest to you?
Oh, well, thank you so much, Patrina. I'm so excited to be here. And I didn't even get a chance to tell you, but your podcast interview on my podcast, Women on Wealth, is one of the most attended, and the feedback I've received is so fantastic. And I've been following you and what you're doing, and I just, all of the kudos for focusing on this in such a successful way. So I'm thrilled to be here. So I guess a little bit about me in a short period. So I am currently, I'm a partner at Principal Wealth Partners. It is a financial services firm based in Connecticut. We're an independent firm working primarily with individuals and families as they're planning for their retirement and other financial goals like education with children. And I joined a little more recently. I spent 20 years in finance on the road for two firms, and was incredibly proud to be part of those firms. And I worked a lot with financial advisors directly and their end clients. And my passion really came from witnessing so many individuals talking very upfront with me about money. So they didn't know who I was. I was there to speak. And especially the women, they kept coming up and talking to me in such a very mellow way, and versus the men. It was just so interesting to see the dynamic. And this went on for 20 years. So when I joined Principal Wealth Partners, and the owner of our firm, Bob Paolucci, said to me, "You should really start a podcast." After I said, "You're crazy," I started to think about it. I said, there's something to be said here about, talking to and helping women, empowering them around finances and getting them more comfortable. And so that was really my hidden passion there. And what I found through the podcast is, this isn't going to be surprising to you and a lot of the listeners, but a lot of our habits and our education around financial education really stems from our childhood. Mm-hmm. And so this really hit home to me because, as you mentioned, I have two girls. They're 10 and 12, and I've been able to focus in the pandemic a little bit more on really having these conversations with them. And I'm also very aware as to what I haven't done right. And we can talk about that too.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm going to pause you right there. So one of the things that you said, I think, is very powerful. And I think, both of us are doing what we do because of our past. Now, I know based on our conversation, your past included it may have been parents, but I know specifically you said your dad taught you about various different things about money. My past is I didn't learn anything about money. It's why I do what I do. So it goes back to your point, though, in my opinion, that the past, whatever that is, you learned a lot or learn things that needed to be involved evolved, I should say, and then you didn't learn much, and then you learned when you got older, and then you then now are an educator of it. So it's very interesting that our backgrounds relative to how we learned about money is different, and that we're both in the space teaching people how to manage their money, so, or how to be educated about money affairs, and how to I want to say master the fundamentals, because that's what I do more of. So what I love that you talked about was, not only are you helping women, which I think is important being a woman, and my audience consists of a lot of women because they gravitate to me, because that's you and I, because that's what we are, right? So we can relate to what they are going through depending on where they are in their lives. So I think it's great that your show is representing that. Like, I'm a woman, I know what you're going through, I have the background to help you through what you're going through, but I also have the real life experience of that. So that's really important. So are you finding that not only your what you're, the fact that you're educated in the financial arena, but that you have life experience that help round out how you have conversations throughout your podcast, talking to women?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there were two experiences for me that are really the reasons I went into finance, candidly. And one of them was my grandmother, who told me one day, when we were going through this box full of index cards, and I asked her what she was looking at, and she said, "Oh, these are all of our finances," which is silly to think today we don't do that anymore. But I remember she said to me very clearly, she said, "I will most likely outlive your grandfather, and I need to understand how we're financially set up." And she turned out to be 100% right. She just actually passed away last year.
Oh,
and my grandfather, thank you. My grandfather passed away, over 10 years ago. So she prepared for that, and that really stuck with me. And the other one was my mother, who told me one day when I was in high school preparing for college and filling out all the application forms, you have to put your salary in there. And I remember asking my mom and my dad, they both worked, what were your salaries? And I was really surprised that my mom at the time made more than my dad. And she said to me very clearly, "Well, I need to make more than your father, because if I ever divorce him, I need to be financially sound." Now they ended up getting divorced a year later. So it was a harsh comment at the time, but again, that's something that really stuck with me. And so, and they bring up both of those stories are so relevant today, because I always say that 90% of women are going to be responsible for their finances at some point in their lives.
That's right.
And most women, unfortunately, prepare too late, because we're outliving our spouse, we're getting divorced. Those are the two most common, but obviously there's more than that as well.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Even within relationships, so, husband and wives together, oftentimes the woman is taking care of all the finances, or even if the husband thinks he is, the wife is probably, really the thought, the forethought on what needs to be done and things like that. So it's really an important topic. So kudos to you for recognizing that and taking both of those perspectives and having the conversation. I think that's really important. That's why I love podcasting. I love going on podcasts, and I love listening to them, because it's the conversation. And that's what I think is so beautiful today, because before it was the taboo conversation. At least in my household, you didn't want to talk about finances. And when I say my household, I'm not talking about my mom. I'm talking about me and my household with my daughter. It was just do it, as opposed to teaching her how it's done and showing her where our limits were from the financial standpoint. So it's now the conversation is not taboo, and it's open, and parents I feel like they're getting more comfortable in what they share. Within the couple themselves, but then with the children as well. So let's go right into that. So children.
Okay.
I love, I told you this before, I started my business in teaching, wanting to ensure that our kids were more financially astute. I taught in schools, I wrote a book for young people. And then you said to me, I did this thing, and I'm gonna let you tell that story. And then I'm showing my daughter, and and I'm expanding upon that in different ways. So tell us that story. Tell us what your dad showed you, or what you learned when you were young. Because I keep saying your dad, I hope I'm right in that.
Yeah.
And what you then do now with your daughter based on what you learned then.
Yeah, it's funny how sometimes such very small conversations can be so life-changing.
Mhm.
So what you're referring to is when I first opened my first checking account.
Mhm.
And I don't candidly remember if my father went to the bank with me or not, but I remember showing him the deposit slips and, this, just the checkbook in general. And I said to him, what do I do? And
Mhm.
so he taught me how to write a check, but I think also more importantly is he taught me how to manage it,
Yes.
right? And so he taught me how to use the checkbook.
Yes.
And I think you and I were joking about that. To this day, I have to still physically write out all of my spending out of my checking account in a book. It's actually over here. Um, because it's a habit of mine, and it's how I check and sort of understand financially where we are. And my husband makes fun of me because he just looks online and he said, yep, got it. And he moves on. But for me, it's a habit that I can't get rid of.
And I love that. And that, you know what, it's funny because like I told you, I teach young people, and writing checks is something that I infuse within the course. And it's also in my book as well. And people don't write checks anymore. I'm like, you would be surprised of how many checks are still written today. So that's why I wanted to make sure you talk about that, because and we're using your example of check writing as an example, but the key message for me was you were taught it and shown it and have done it over and over again. So it's something that you're continuing, and that is all what it's about, right? With young people, showing them these things so that it becomes a habit of theirs when they get older. Yeah, you want to say something?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is one of those shame on me. I didn't think about it because my girls aren't old enough to have checking accounts yet, but they are getting there. And I think the story I explained to you was not that long ago. I think I do what most of us do, and you sort of check your accounts at the kitchen table.
Yeah.
And I was standing at the counter, and I've got the website up, and and I started writing a check. Mm-hmm. And normally I pay it online, but it was a bill that came in the mail. So I wrote out the check, and my youngest came up to me and said, "What are you doing?" And that's when I realized, I'm like, wow, they've never seen a check. So I explained it to her, but it was interesting because she's like, well, can't you just Venmo them, or where's your credit card? And I was like, well, you can, but you are going to have to write checks at some point in your life. So again, shame on me that I didn't think about that. But it's such an important step. So I love the fact that you're doing that, and that you put it in your book. I remember reading that and going, yep, that's right.
That's great. Thank you for that as well. And it's, it's funny. Even, and I don't, because I think it was feedback that I got on a workshop that I did. So I'm not sure if it's in volume 1 of the book that you have, but the other thing about check writing is I literally in the new book put, don't use red pen. Like, just don't use pencil. Like, went that far with it, because to your point, they're not being taught it. How are they supposed to know that they shouldn't do those things? Don't, I think I even said not those erasable pens, like whatever. But the point is, our job is to teach them while they're young. And you are a prime example of when that's done, that habit will probably continue to be with them as they go, get into adulthood. And that's what I loved about the story.
No, thank you. And you and I talked about this a little bit. I'm working on my own little project about educating kids, and more specifically girls. And so I've been doing a lot of research, and you and I know that we're not starting young enough. And certainly if you're relying on the education system, that unfortunately is starting too late if they're getting anything at all. And so, all of these studies show that kids lose, they become more anxious, and they lose confidence, and they're losing it earlier and earlier on, and especially girls. And I think the prime time that girls lose confidence is between 8 and 14. So my girls are in that sweet spot right now. And I think I've seen that, especially through the pandemic. And I think it's really important that, they have to understand finance, and they have to start understanding, because then it helps with their confidence later in life.
Yeah. And you know what, and again, going back to you're so right. And I don't know if I said this when I talked to you, but I'm in the personal finance space now. I was not when my daughter's now 31, when she was your kid's age, the ages they are now, when she was that young, I was not into personal finance. So my thing was, ensuring that I just did everything. You know what I mean? I'm just doing it. I'm just trying to get it done, make sure that, you know, I'm doing A, B, C, and D, and whatever I couldn't do, I didn't do, right? And
Right.
now when I think about that, and again, this is why I so love your story, is you recognize that your kids are at that age, and you're working in the financial space. You know that it's not consistently done in school, so you are taking it upon yourself to teach them things that you know they will need. And I love that so much. So you talked about the check writing experience. Can you talk about anything else that you're sharing with them that that they're not learning in school, and or that you think they need just a little bit more reinforcement if they are learning it in school?
Yeah, it's interesting. We just started talking about investments, and this is a hard one because you know, my husband and I have accounts for them, UTMA accounts that will eventually be theirs when they're adults, and we started investing in them, and so I decided to share with them those accounts. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying every month to show them the value, because they're invested in mutual funds, and they both have stock as well. And so what I did in the pandemic is I said to my youngest, I said, okay, if you were to buy a company that you think will grow, what company would you buy today? And she's like, well, that's easy. That's Amazon. They're on our door every day. And my other daughter was like, well, that's easy. That's Starbucks. I want to go to Starbucks every day. So it's nice to see that they're engaging. And, but at the same time, we did start talking about mutual funds and what does that mean? It's a basket. Yeah. And it's interesting because I've done this over the last few months, so it hasn't been going on for very long. And over the last few months, we haven't really seen the market go down. Mm-hmm. So all they're seeing is it going up. So I'm actually eagerly waiting for that, not too eagerly, but waiting for that moment when it does go down. I know, just so that they start to get an idea of, you know, what volatility really means. And so I'm hoping to incorporate that a little bit more going forward.
Okay, so now that great. And yes, so I tell the Starbucks story all the time. So I love that your daughter said that. But meaning that that's a sock that I also have. But so do you have any thoughts on how you plan to talk to them about when you see it go down, or you show them that volatility? Like, how do you plan to have that conversation with them?
I know.
I can foresee them saying, wait a minute, what? Give me my money. Like, you know, how do you plan to do that?
Yeah, I haven't. It's a good question. And right now, my only way to answer that is probably how we as financial advisors have to talk about it with our clients. Mm-hmm. Is that this is when the emotions kick in, and we know that emotions can cause us to react in ways that aren't necessarily the best way to react. Mm-hmm. And so given that this investment, whether it's Amazon or Starbucks or the mutual fund, is not for tomorrow, right? This is an account that they're not going to have access to for years. We need to sit and ride it out and watch it recover, which it will. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, if we have more money that's somewhere, right? I think one of my girls has money hidden away somewhere. This would be a really good time to put more money in, because you're technically getting it on sale. And so I think the idea of trying to help them understand that there are sales, yes, and that the market doesn't go in a straight line, I think is the long-term concept. So it's a good question. I haven't had to do it yet, so who knows?
Yeah, no, I think the way you're talking about it is exactly right. So, and I love that you use on sale. I know a lot of my BFFs in the financial space, that's how they talk about it. Like, you would go buy a shirt or sweater on sale. Why not, buy a company on sale is how they say it. So I love that you said it that way.
It's the first thing I learned when I got into this business right after college, is that you're absolutely right. This is the only industry where things go on sale and people will freak out. Yes. Right. Yes. Yeah. And they'll run. And it's unfortunate, because that's not the way it should be.
That's exactly right. So now, so when your podcast is going back to your podcast now is for women, right? You interview women and it's for women, correct?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. When I started the podcast, a friend of mine said to me, you should really go out and interview successful women that are outside of finance and get an idea of what they want to talk about. So that has been incredibly helpful. Okay. And I learned through that process and interview. I think so far I've interviewed maybe 150 women. Uh-huh. And the feedback was pretty extreme, where a lot of women said, I'd really like to hear from other women. That would make me feel more comfortable. And so that was the decision. So as of right now, no men have been on my podcast. I've had a lot of them reach out, which have been great. And maybe I'll change that one day. But I haven't done that yet. However, I have received messages from men that are listening to my podcast, and they said, listen, it's the same. It is, it's the lessons aren't really any different. So I am aware of a few men that listen, but the analytics that I get from Buzzsprout, where I host my podcast, that doesn't tell me what sex people are. So I don't really know.
But yeah, I feel like, and I hope you're okay with me saying this, I feel like you're like giving me, validating why it's only been women guests. Like, that's a great thing. Like, is that what you're doing? Are you trying to like make me understand why it's only women? Like, I have no problem with that. Was that what you were doing?
Yeah, I didn't intend to in the beginning, but I just following the suggestions of these women, I've stayed the course. But I hate to say this, but when it comes to interviewing financial experts, which I do on occasion, it is hard to find successful financial experts that are women. I did interview a portfolio manager who is a very successful portfolio manager here based in Connecticut, but it's harder to find, which is a little bit of a challenge.
Listen, I feel like having women guests, and you said about 150, wow, that's a lot. That's a great thing, because back to our earlier point, I feel like women are the most powerful beings there are. So two is we relate. You are the host of the show, and the guests that you have on and the folks that are listening, it's all relatable. So I think that's a great thing. I don't feel like you should, in my opinion, you don't have to compromise going with anything other because it's working for you so far. But I'm a little bit like, wow, 150. And you said like the episode with me that, is getting a lot of traction. Wow, That's amazing.
Yeah,
I didn't realize it was that many.
In terms of the actual downloads or, the downloads are well, it's almost like a snowball effect. Right?
Oh, no. I meant the number of episodes you had. I didn't realize you had that many.
No. I'm sorry. No, I haven't. I don't. I'm sorry. That was the number of women that I interviewed to get ideas for the podcast.
Got it.
I started it earlier this year. I think I started it in March. Okay. And I run about 2 a month. So I'm 20 something. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Sorry
I like that. Even within the universe of 20. I love it. I love it so much.
I know that's enough for me.
Now, if parents are listening to this, let's say moms specifically are listening to us, what advice would you give to them about teaching their 10, 11, 12-year-old about money? What's 2, 3 critical things you think is important for them to start talking about right now?
Well, that's a good question. So the way I'm thinking about it right now is that, one, we should be open about it. I don't think we need to open up our investment accounts and share with them the detail, but I think that we need to be very open about how we think about money and why we work and the value. And I think especially if you do enjoy your job, and I hope that people listening do, I love what I do, and my girls know that. And I think that's really important. I also think that we should allow them to question, and we should answer as open and honest as we can. The other lesson that I'm realizing through all of this, going back to my writing a check with my daughter, is that we need to just be more aware as we go through our day-to-day routine. There are going to be teachable moments that if we can just pause and take a moment and say, you know what, this is really important. Whether you're in the grocery store or whether, I think I mentioned to you, I just told you my daughter loves Starbucks.
Yes.
And, she's paying for that with her allowance. And then she was introduced to another coffee shop with a very large brand name that isn't as expensive. And she joked and she's like, well, this is really good coffee too. I should focus on this, right? It's the same lesson with going to TJ Maxx and buying leggings versus going to Lululemon. And so she's starting to realize, and part of that is understanding allowance. And everyone has a different philosophy. I do have a philosophy of utilizing allowance, and that's one of my teachable moments that I hope to continue to use.
I love that. So like if I pull that whole story through regarding the coffee, it's a lot of people think about budgeting and when they start to look at their money and be what I call more intimate with their money, they don't like to do it because they feel it to be restrictive. It's not
Yes.
restrictive. It's actually empowering because one, you have a sense of what you have, right? And then you can then just better decide how you want to spend it. So it sounds like your daughter said, well, wait, I can get great tasting coffee for a lesser amount and probably more cups and I'll have money left over if I go to this other place. Like, I love that. That's perfect.
Yeah. And I don't want to suggest to her that she should never drink Starbucks again, because if she enjoys it, she should. I think you and I had a story about, I know you have a story about, just, really enjoying those moments when you do.
Yes.
So, and I think that's really important. And I refer to budgets a little bit different. I call it the intimidating B word, because to your point, so many Americans don't have one.
Yes.
And so if we don't have one as parents, how are we going to help our children create those, early on?
So true. I worked with so many clients that didn't like the word budgeting. Like budgeting was that like B word that they didn't like. I'm like, okay, let's call it something else. Call it the spending plan, call it the money meeting, call it whatever you want to do it. Just play music and drink a glass of wine when you're doing it to make it more fun. Like just do the exercise, right? And how you do it is completely on you. Paper and pen, Excel spreadsheet. I don't really suggest people moving to apps until they sort of have a few cycles on paper and pen or Excel spreadsheet. But anyway, however you want to do it, just make sure you do the exercise. And I just find it once people start doing it, that they're more empowered versus the restrictive mindset they have going into it.
No, I totally agree. And I think everyone approaches it that does have a budget. To your point, they approach it differently. I don't use apps. I handwrite things, as we already talked about. And I think just having that process and consistently kind of sticking to it is the most important thing.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So now your podcast is about women. So first tell the listeners the name of your show and where they can find it. And then I want to get 2 tips for women before we go.
It's called Women on Wealth. And you can find it on really all of the major locations. I'm not even saying that right. I'm not very tech savvy, but you can go to
wherever
iTunes,
you listen to podcasts,
Spotify,
right? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and if you Google it, it'll come up. Women on Wealth. Yes.
Okay. Now you before we tell them where they can find you, you can drop anything you want. Give me 2 tips for women in money. Women in finance.
I think the first tip is, one, if you don't have the confidence today of understanding your finances, and we're all guilty if we have a spouse, we want to be as efficient as possible. And so we delegate. Mm-hmm. And my husband and I delegate. But at the same time, you still need to have an awareness of your finances. So that's step number 1. If you're not there, just start down that road. I think that's the most important thing because of that 90% number, right? Yeah. Most women are going to have to be responsible at some point. So start sooner rather than later.
Yes.
And I think the second thing is, going back to that intimidating B word, is by having that budget, it allows you to have an awareness of how you're saving. And so, and most aren't focused on the saving piece because we are living the day-to-day life. There's so much going on. It's hard to think long-term. Yeah. And we hear this all the time. People joke. It's like, wow, when you go on vacation, you go to Europe and you go for a week and you plan for months, right? No one ever does the same thing when they're planning for their retirement, which is so silly. And so we need to change that focus. So
that's exactly right.
2 very broad ones, but I think you have to at least start there.
No, and I love that. I think there are 2 great ones. Again, when you think about women and money for the reasons that you said, I think they were spot on. So people, I know my followers, they're going to love this episode. So where can they find you if they want to follow up with you or maybe even, want to pitch themselves as a guest to be on your show? Where can they find you?
Oh, no, thank you. So yeah, like I mentioned, the podcast is Women on Wealth. My goodness. Mm-hmm. I can also be found at our firm website, which is Principal Wealth Partners. So that's Principal PLE, wealthpartners.com. And all of my information is on the website there as well. And my email is jogilvie, Jogilvie @principalwealthpartners.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on, what else am I on? And LinkedIn.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, I appreciate you. This has been a great episode. You all, she's giving you tips to teach your children. She's giving you tips from a mom perspective. And she's also given information from us as women on how you can get started. And like I always tell you all, forget what you didn't do yesterday. You now have information to move you forward. So make sure that you take the time to do the exercise. You can call it budget, spending plan, whatever you call it. Make sure you take time to do it. And if you didn't hear me at the beginning of the show, make sure if you're looking at us on YouTube, drop down and subscribe here. If you're listening to us, make sure you follow me across the platform that you are listening on. I appreciate you. And make sure that you leave us a comment to let us know if you like the episode, any questions you have about what we've talked about. So we're here to answer questions for you as well down in the comments. Make sure you check the show notes where I will put the link to Women in Wealth, right?
Women on Wealth.
Women on Wealth, and Julina's information as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Always enjoy it. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.